In 1963, Edmund Gettier published a short paper challenging the traditional analysis of knowledge as justified true belief, according to which a subject S knows a proposition P, just in case firstly S believes that P, secondly that S is justified in believing that P, and thirdly P is true. Gettier's counterexample showed cases where all three conditions are satisfied, yet we hesitate to say that the subject genuinely knows because the truth of their belief is, in a sense, accidental or lucky, rather than properly grounded in their justification. Roberto de Caleggi's article, published in the Journal of History of Analytical Philosophy, argues that the entire 60-year debate has missed something entirely. The Gettier problem arises only because of an unexamined and illegitimate assumption about what kind of truth is at stake. Drawing on the epistemology of St. Thomas Aquinas, de Caleggi contends that once we identify and reject this hidden assumption, the Gettier problem simply dissolves, not because we found a clever fourth condition, but because the problem was never well formed to begin with. Now, the heart of de Caleggi's argument is Aquinas' famous definition of truth, the adequatio re et intellectus, the conformity or adequation of a thing an intellect, a formula Aquinas inherited from the medieval Jewish philosopher Isaac ben Israeli, but transformed and made it central to scholastic epistemology. Aquinas distinguished two directions this conformity can run, corresponding to two kinds of truth. Firstly, we have logical truth, which is the conformity of a human intellect to things. Here the mind is the measured, and reality is the measure. The human knower must adapt her understanding or his understanding to fit an independently existing world, and this adaptation is always effortful, it's always partial, and sometimes only approximate. Secondly, we have ontological truth, the conformity of things to the divine intellect itself. Here the relationship is reversed. God is the measure, and the created things are the measured, against his eternal idea of them, much as an artisan's product is true insofar as it matches the plan in the artisan's mind. Because God creates all things according to his own knowledge of them, his grasp of reality is automatically complete, it's total, it's unchanging, and there is no gap between divine thought and the world for God to bridge. Crucially, only logical truth is available to finite human knowers. Ontological truth, this complete, perspective-independent, God's eye grasp of how everything stands, belongs to God alone. As de Caleggi's authority, John Whipple basically explains that for Aquinas, it's only through the intellect actively conforming itself to a thing that the relation of adequation is completed. On the human side, this is necessarily a perspectival, situated achievement. It's not a view from everywhere at once. Now, de Caleggi's central claim is that the Gettier-style cases smuggle in ontological truth while pretending to evaluate logical truth. So consider the two classical examples that he discusses. Gettier's original case is that Smith justifiably believes that the man who will get the job has 10 coins in his pocket, based on being told Jones will be hired and having counted Jones's coins. In fact, Smith himself gets the job, and unbeknownst to him, he also has 10 coins in his pocket. His belief is true and justified, but it seems not to be knowledge. Roderick Chilsom has another example of the sheep in the field case, where Janet sees what looks like a sheep in a field and justifiably believes that there is a sheep in the field. The animal she sees is actually a dog, but an actual sheep is hidden behind it. Her belief turns out to be true, but only by luck. De Caleggi argues that the third condition in both cases, P is true, taken as a flat, unqualified view from nowhere fact, there is a sheep in that field, full stop, illegitimately invokes the complete perspective transcending knowledge available only to God. Janet, as a finite knower, has no access to that totalizing fact. She only has access to her justified perspectival grasp of the situation. If Janet instead said something like, that was more modest and accurate, I am observing an animal in a field and I think that I'm justified in believing it's a sheep, well, this statement would be straightforwardly true and would constitute genuine knowledge with no Gettier-style luck involved. Now, de Caleggi's proposed fix is to drop the third condition of the classical analysis entirely, since the only truth available to humans is logical truth, the situated adequation of the individual mind to things from its vantage point, and since this perfectible truth is already implicit in justified belief itself, to believe something justifiably already is to commit oneself to truth from one's own standpoint. The independent, unqualified truth condition becomes a twice. So knowledge on de Caleggi's account should be reconceived simply as justified belief, without a separate ontologically loaded truth requirement in the way that the Gettier cases and Edmund Gettier kind of understands it. Now, de Caleggi situates his Thomistic move within a broader philosophical debate about perspectival versus non-perspectival knowledge. He invokes Hilary Putnam, who in Reason, Truth and History rejected metaphysical realism's God's eye point of view, and Thomas Nagel, whose The View from Nowhere simply questioned a perspectival objectivity. He also draws on Scottish Thomist philosopher John Haldane, who defended realism against Putnam not by invoking a divine viewpoint, but through the principle no epistemology without ontology, the idea that the mind can conform to things because reality is intrinsically intelligible. De Holegge also argues against the historian of philosophy, Maria Rosa Antonagaza, and there's no sharp distinction or there's no sharp categorical difference between belief and knowledge, only a difference of evidential degree, citing John Locke's view that knowledge requires fuller evidential warrant than mere probable belief. And finally, he goes and revisits Plato's Meno, arguing against the Gettier's own appeal to Plato, that the dialogue's concept of episteme, knowledge as opposed to mere truth opinion, was already closer to JB than to JTB, since it emphasizes reasoning out of explanations rather than an extra metaphysical truth condition. So for de Holegge, Gettier cases generate the air of paradox, only because they ask finite perspectival knowers to satisfy a truth condition that, properly understood through Aquinas' distinction, belongs exclusively to divine intellect. Once logical truth replaces ontological truth as the relevant standard, justified belief suffices for knowledge, and the 60-year-old puzzle simply evaporates.